The sky outside the hospital was the color of old ash, muted, heavy, and unmoving. It wasn't raining hard, just enough to blur the outlines of the world, enough to hide the tears of a man who had forgotten how to cry. Jackson Reed sat at the farthest table in the hospital cafeteria, a forgotten cup of coffee at his elbow, untouched food tray before him, and a storm inside his chest that no one could see. Once hailed as one of the most successful CEOs in the country, Jackson was a man who had it all: wealth, status, and a beautiful family. But none of that meant anything anymore. His wife, Claire, and their only son, Liam, had died in a tragic accident 3 years ago. A speeding truck, a late-night phone call, and then, silence. The funeral was elegant. The condolences were endless. The sympathy cards came in gold-trimmed envelopes. But no one stayed long enough to see what happened after. No one saw how the once charismatic titan of industry became a shadow, how he buried himself in boardrooms and spreadsheets, how he began measuring time and heartbeats he barely felt anymore. Jackson wasn't at the hospital for anyone. Not really. It was just one of the many places he went to disappear. Sometimes he claimed to be visiting a business partner's relative, or donating to pediatric wings through his company's foundation. But the truth was simpler. He came here because it made him feel closer to pain he could understand. Grief was not foreign here. It clung to the walls, lived in the halls. He felt less alone among the quiet chaos of life and death. That day, like many before it, Jackson chose the corner table. It faced the window, giving him a view of the courtyard beyond, where leaves swirled and birds occasionally perched on empty benches. It was here, amidst this dull routine of silent sitting, that something unexpected happened. A soft voice, barely louder than the hum of the vending machines, broke through the static. "Can I sit here?" Jackson turned slowly. She stood there with her feet turned inward and a cup of green jello in her hand. A little girl. Maybe 6 or 7 years old. Thin. Pale. Bald under her knitted hat. But her eyes, they were enormous and alive. Bright with something Jackson had not seen in a long time. Hope. He hesitated. For just a breath. But then he nodded. She smiled, climbed into the chair opposite him with great care, and set her jello down like it was a fine dish. Jackson stared, unsure what to say or do. Kids were foreign to him now. The sound of laughter, the swing of tiny legs beneath a chair, had once been daily music in his home. Now, it only brought memories he tried hard not to relive. "You look sad," she said simply, scooping a spoonful of jello and holding it up like a toast. "Is your heart sick too?" Jackson blinked, stunned by her honesty. No one had asked him a question like that in years. He didn't know what to say. But the lump in his throat told him that somehow, this tiny stranger had already reached a place no one else could. She didn't press him for an answer. Instead, she began talking about her room in the children's wing, about the nurse who wore silly socks, about how she named all her 4 bags after cartoon characters. Her name was Lila. She liked rainbows, bubbles, and cinnamon toast. Her favorite animal changed every week. Right now, it was turtles. Her words danced across the table, soft and sweet, filling the cold space around Jackson. She didn't seem afraid of the machines, the wires, or her own reflection in the glass. She had accepted things. Not with bitterness, but with bravery. The kind of bravery that didn't come with medals or applause. The kind that was born from having no other choice. When she finished her jello, she looked at him again. "You didn't say anything," she said gently, not with judgment but with care. Jackson cleared his throat. "I didn't know what to say." She smiled. "That's okay. Most people don't." And with that, she slid off the chair and walked away, her small frame disappearing down the hallway, escorted by a nurse who must have finally found her. Jackson sat in silence, heart thudding louder than it had in months. Something had shifted. Something real. He didn't know who she truly was or why she had come to him. But he knew one thing as he stared down at the chair she'd just left. Tomorrow, he would come back. And he would wait. Jackson returned to the hospital the next morning, earlier than usual, dressed not in his usual crisp business suit but in a soft, dark sweater and slacks. For the first time in years, he hadn't looked at his morning stock report or opened his schedule filled with conference calls. Something inside him had shifted, subtle but undeniable. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe that little girl wouldn't return. Maybe it had been a fluke. Just one of those passing moments life threw at you like a warm breeze, there for a breath, then gone. But he needed to come back. Needed to know if she was real. If the little spark she'd lit in him hadn't been imagined. The cafeteria was mostly empty again, save for a few exhausted parents and half-eaten trays. Jackson walked straight to the same table in the corner, his heart pounding in a way that surprised him. He sat and waited. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then, just as he began to question himself, he heard that now familiar voice. "You came back." He looked up, and there she was. Lila, wearing a sunshine yellow hoodie far too big for her, with sleeves that covered most of her hands. Her pink scarf was replaced with a knitted blue cap, slightly crooked on her head. In her hands? Another cup of Jell-O. This time red. Jackson smiled, and something inside his chest softened even further. "You didn't think I would?" he asked, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Warm. Human." She slid into the chair, grinning. "Most grown-ups don't come back. They always say they will. But then they don't." "Well," he said, folding his hands, "maybe they don't meet girls like you every day." Lila beamed at that, and they sat quietly for a few moments, eating and listening to the distant beeps and low murmurs drifting from the hallway. From that day on, Jackson returned daily. Their friendship bloomed in that hospital cafeteria, not loud or dramatic, but quietly, beautifully. It wasn't about gifts or grand gestures. It was about presence. About listening. He learned she had been battling a rare form of brain cancer for almost 2 years. That her mom, a single mother named June, worked late into the night cleaning hotel rooms just to afford their tiny apartment and medication not covered by insurance. That Lila knew more about MRI machines and radiation therapy than any child should. But she never let her illness define her. Instead, she told him stories. About the best nurse who gave out candy canes in July. About the girl 2 doors down who painted birds on her 4-stand. She had a way of seeing the world not as cruel, but curious. And Jackson listened. In return, Lila began to ask questions. Why did he always wear dark clothes? Why didn't he ever bring anyone with him? Where did he go when he left the hospital? And eventually, she asked about the photo he kept tucked in his wallet. It was Claire and Liam. The only photo he carried anymore. He hesitated the first time, but slowly, Jackson opened up. He told Lila about the accident. About how the house had fallen silent. How he tried to fill the void with work. How success didn't matter when there was no one waiting for you at the end of the day. Lila didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached across the table, her small fingers brushing his hand. "You have a sad heart," she whispered, "but it still works." Jackson didn't know it then, but that moment would be carved into his memory forever. Days turned into weeks. Jackson began funding new machines for the children's ward, anonymously at first. Then he offered to cover Lila's treatments when June, exhausted and teary-eyed, finally met him face to face. She had tried to refuse. But when Jackson told her, with quiet conviction, "Your daughter saved me," she knew there was something deeper happening than charity. Then, one rainy morning, like the first day he met her, Lila didn't come to the cafeteria. He waited. And waited. A nurse passed by and paused when she saw him. Her expression was soft. Kind. But it struck fear into Jackson's heart. She had a rough night, the nurse said. They moved her to ICU. She's resting now. Her fever spiked and she was very weak. Jackson left his tray, pushed through the doors, and found himself outside her room moments later. Through the glass, he could see her, tiny and pale, her chest rising and falling with effort, machines hissing and blinking all around her. His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't felt this helpless since the day he lost his own family. But he didn't leave.